Well, you know, before, back uh, only a few years ago, actually, malware, has had that redeeming quality of being, quote unquote, a non-violent crime. You get a ransomware, they're after your identity, they're after your credit, but at the end of the day, it's not a threat to human life. But what we've been seeing in the past few years is ransomware and malware striking healthcare facilities, power plants, water supply plants. So now malware becomes a threat to human life, which is the most prized thing in the world, right? In that sense, malware has become more of a threat in the past few years. Sort of. And let me flesh that out for you. Automation is crucial to not be the low-hanging fruit. Lots of cyber criminals will try to attack you, and you will be caught if you have low defense. If you do not have that layer of automation, those EDR software, those signature-based EDR software, those signature-based information intrusion detection systems, if you don't have these, you are a low-hanging fruit, and the criminals will come to get you, essentially. This means you need that layer of automation to protect yourself. However, that said, a very skilled hacker, someone who used spear phishing, very targeted attacks, they will get by that layer of automation. But at the end of the day, these are very specific attacks, and most of the criminals still nowadays, and you can look up the IBM report or the Verizon data breach report, they're still opportunistic. They want easy money, right? You must not be their easy money, and for that you need to use automation. All right, I'm gonna do a hot take, I think, on that, and it might be controversial, a little bit controversial. I advocate for behavior-based intrusion detection systems, IDSs. I prefer behavior-based IDSs to signature-based IDSs because signature, it's doable and it's rather quote-unquote easy to escape those signatures by just changing the malware. So behavior-based is more reliable in that sense, and it can trigger alerts for your incident response team to respond and to use more advanced tools. What is controversial is that I believe intrusion prevention system, IPSs, are probably more problematic because they block the malware before it spreads, right? So it should be a good thing for us security advocates to want IPSs, but when you look at your incident detection logs, 99.9%, even if you got a good behavior-based IDS, 99.9% are still false positives. So if you have an IPS who blocks 99.9% of the false positive traffic based on maybe that tiny 1 on 1,000 malware, that yes, it's all it needs to breach you, right? That one tiny bit. But you block so much legitimate traffic that in most of the use case, maybe not in a power plant, but in most of the use case, if you've got a project management app, for instance, if you block so much of that legitimate traffic, your customers will not want to use your app because of the IPS. So it's a big trade-off. In most commercial software, I believe a behavior-based IDS to be better than an IPS. But of course, it depends on your risk profile. You always have to do the risk assessment. I'm in governance, risk, and compliance, by the way. I think it shows here in my answer. And yeah, well, that's the part where I go back to being a GRC. I don't have hands-on, my hands on scanners every day. My job mostly involves making sure the people who do the scans actually do them and treat them appropriately based on the security policies, and making sure basically everybody uses a scanner. That said, there's no better way to prevent malware than to ensuring your vulnerable systems never end up in production at all. That's the best way to do it. So this is why you need, instead of maybe doing your scan in your production, maybe you do it in your deployment pipeline. You need your software composition analyst tool, SCA tool. You need your static applications testing tool to make sure you do not introduce a vulnerable component in your production environment. You need to scan before they reach production. Whatever scanner you use, let's say you use, I don't want to name technology, but they need to happen before it reaches production. Yes, caveat beforehand, GRC person. I'm not doing the actual removal myself. I'm writing the policy, so the people who do the removal do it according to how how senior management decided to do it. That said, most of the time, if you've got an infected machine, a laptop that got malware on it, most of the time, the data on that laptop will be more valuable than the workstation itself. And nowadays, you got all kinds of malware. Yes, you got the microviruses that infect your spreadsheets, but you got very advanced malware that you learn about in the CEH. You got multipartite viruses, you got boot sector viruses, you even got viruses that touch your firmware. So you need to do a careful analysis of your infected workstation to make sure that not only the disk is affected, but what about all those other components? The motherboard, we saw all kinds of software, they infect the boot sector, so you may need to flash everything and still it comes back because it's literally in your TPM, for instance. So in those cases, since you've got so many viruses, if you're not 100% sure, it might be a better risk decision to throw away the laptop, even if it's a Mac, to throw away the laptop instead of reintroducing it in your environment, in your network, and then boom, you got the malware that spreads again. It's all risk assessment every time, but the data is typically much more valuable than the hardware. So you got to think about the data, about your users, and it always depends on your risk profile. Well, as I've said previously, the complications are most probably that the malware can be everywhere on your machine, not just on your disk. And that said, there are other complications that are more, that are part of the CEH curriculum. You'll learn about it training for the CEH. But what can happen on an infected machine is that you may decide to restore it from a previous snapshot. It's on a server. You restore it from a previous snapshot. Well, when do you know when the infection happened? The snapshot itself might be infected. So for servers and virtual servers, it can become really challenging on how to restore a machine, and you have to do that careful analysis, what happened, and you have to have, logs. It's prerequisite, but sometimes we don't even have reliable logs. And SIEM, SIEM, I don't know how to pronounce it, but you need to have these components to do your malware analysis, your post-incident analysis, as a matter of fact. I did. And okay, bear with me, it's gonna come out of the left field, but I swear it's gonna make sense by the end. So I'm in governance, risk, and compliance. That means my responsibility is to monitor what's happening in the market, what's happening in the headlines, what's happening with laws and regulations all around the world, to be able to be the trusted advisor and to tell my Chief Information Security Officer where should we invest to protect ourselves in the next 2 or 3 years, and try to be proactive on whatever trend is coming up in the market. So this is my day-to-day. I monitor what's happening around the world to try to find out what's coming up next. And I was reading about a recent breach that had affected Cisco, for that matter. And the great thing about the Cisco breach is that their incident response team was very thorough and very transparent. A number one example of how you should be treating an incident and be very transparent to your customers. And I was reading the whole read-up of the whole incident analysis they did. as I alluded previously, they were able to, they got these logs, they understood very well what happened, the privilege escalation, and all those hacking phase. And that's where I'm getting at. You read that document from the incident response team, and it's the exact steps you learn about in the CEH. This is the real world. This is cyber criminals who haven't trained for their CEH, or well, if they did, they would lose their certification because they did violate the code of ethics. But they respected all the steps you learn doing the CH. They did the reconnaissance, they did the scanning, they did the user account enumeration, and then they did the escalation of privilege after the exploitation, and then they installed more tools, and they did the data exfiltration. And what's interesting about that is I was reading that with my CH training, and I was understanding everything that was going on. They used Active Directory enumeration tools. They used PSExec. Oh, yeah, I saw that in the CEH. That makes sense to me. They did scans, and they used Mimikatz. Oh, I used Mimikatz during my CH training. And oh, they did pass the hash. Okay, yeah, I did pass the hash during security training. It makes sense to me. They dumped this specific folder in the Active Directory, just like I learned in the CEH. These are real bad guys, and they do essentially the techniques we learned in the CEH. So what we learned in the CEH is relevant because it reflects what's happening in the real world. And me, as a GRC specialist who understood what's going on, I'm able to read that technical breakdown, understand the problems that happened to Cisco because Cisco was so transparent, and I'm digesting that and bring it back up in my risk assessment to my chief information security officer and telling, this is what happens nowadays. This is how our network looks like. This is how the hackers get in. And I suggest we do this. The CEH training, even it's technical, it's hands-on, and it's based on being an attacker, well, that allows me to bring that up a level further, understand what's going on, and give strategic advice. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you will get struck by malware. In my opinion, in 2022 and beyond, it's especially for a large organization, it's almost impossible not to have a successful phishing attack or somebody clicking on that infected Excel file to have malware spread in their networks. It's something that is going to happen. So you absolutely need stellar incident response procedures, and you need to rehearse them, and you especially need to set up the communication of a breach if a breach is bound to happen. My manager, my employer, he has this amazing quote: if somebody makes only one mistake in a given year and your company has 10,000 employees, well, that's 10,000 mistakes a year. One of those mistakes is going to be clicking on a phishing link, and it's going to bring a malware to your company. You need to prepare for that. You need to really work on your incident response. That means you need to people, as I said about the workstation example before, you need somebody who knows how to analyze a workstation being compromised. You need then somebody who gets a report from the person that analyzed it and is able to tell, oh, well, that workstation was not encrypted. We have a HIPAA breach, for instance. We need to report that to the authorities. We need to know how to report that to authorities. We need to report that to the media. Maybe we need a media communication management plan. These things, they are very hard, take time, and the last thing you want is to have an incident and not be ready with all these things you've rehearsed before. So that's my advice as a CEH. We know how to get into networks. We have those techniques. We're able to craft those phishing attacks. We've got great tools to do those phishing attacks. We know how social engineering works, and at the end of the day, there's going to be a human who's going to fall for this social engineering. So you need to be ready and to have these incident response plans set up, rehearsed, tested, and everybody on board? I do. As a matter of fact, in 2014, I got infected myself by malware. I'm not proud of it, but that's something that happened to me. I was a contractor at the time. I needed to use Internet Explorer to fulfill that contract, and I needed to install the client's toolbar to do my work. It was a specific toolbar, and I somehow stumbled, and the toolbar disappeared. And I panicked. See the social engineering part? It was fear-based. I panicked. I kind of pressed all kinds of buttons, and I ended up thinking it was a wrong Flash plugin. So what did I do? I clicked on an ad that had a fake Flash update. There's a reason why Flash has been disabled everywhere, because it was a great vector of malware. I installed the fake Flash update, and I got ransomware on my machine. A big old malware infection on my machine. And I was in total panic because I had 2 children. Well, I still do have them, but now I have 4. I had 2 children at the time, and all my baby pictures got encrypted. Worse, I had complementary storage, a backup hard drive, but it was connected to my machine, so it got encrypted as well. Luckily, my backup hard drive had built-in snapshots that malware designers weren't aware of, so they weren't able to encrypt those snapshots that were built into my backup hardware software, basically. And I was able to restore my baby pictures out of that, because my baby pictures were my most prized asset on that computer. And the lesson is, of course, make offsite backups. Nowadays, that hard drive, I still have it because, hey, I've got emotionally attached to it, I guess. I still have it, but now I plug it only once a week to do my weekly backup. With it, I got a thumb drive, 128 gigabit thumb drive that I use, and I put it in my office. So I have got, even if my house burns down, my baby pictures are somewhere else safe. And I even get cloud backups on top of that to make sure all my children's pictures are safe, even if I click on the wrong link. So yeah, this is a horror story that affected myself. Of course, I've got much more experience nowadays. I wasn't a CH in 2014, but it's even if you're somebody who's tech savvy, the social engineering works on everybody. I was panicking because I was not being paid while the toolbar wasn't working, and I clicked on everything. I tried to troubleshoot very fast, and I got infected.